Thanks, Paige. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the tradition of custodianship and law of the country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand, and also on which you all stand today. I pay my respect to those who have cared and continue to care for country. So the session that I have for you today, it's really aimed at smaller institutions and any custodians of special collections or archives who don't have access to a conservation department in-house. Many of you will be already well along this path, and I will be preaching to the converted, so to speak. So I won't be offended at all if you decide to log off and regain some time this afternoon. So, but for those of you who do want to stay for this conversation, I hope there might be some bits and pieces in here for you. And I look forward to any questions at the end. So we're going to start off by defining interventive versus preventive conservation. Interventive is any act by a conservator that involves a direct interaction between the conservator and an individual item. So these interventive treatments may involve cleaning or stabilising or repair of the object. Preventive conservation or preservation activities are, it's a very wide phrase, and it encompasses all measures and actions aimed at avoiding and minimising future deterioration or loss. These measures and actions are indirect. They do not interfere with the materials and structures of the items, and they don't typically modify their appearance. So collection stewardship in general is it's a balance between slowing deterioration and preventing damage on one hand, and providing meaningful access to cultural heritage items on the other hand. These two aims are in direct opposition to each other, so everything is a compromise. And limited budgets and small teams make an impact as well. Nonetheless, preventive conservation opens up a significant range of opportunities to really provide overarching collection care in a relatively low cost and high impact way. So why are preservation activities powerful? When we consider them in relation to interventive treatment that has to be done by a conservator, they're typically much cheaper. They can be undertaken on whole collections rather than individual items. With training, librarians and archivists can perform these tasks, and even students and volunteers, which opens up its own set of opportunities. These actions send a signal to staff and clients that the collections are valued and cared for. And then this is an important point. We not only have to do the right thing as collection stewards, but we have to be seen to do the right thing as well. Preventive conservation activities provide opportunities to gather collection level information that can be useful for future planning. And as I've already mentioned, they can be a source of volunteer and fundraising opportunities as well. So we're going to have a quick romp through the agents of deterioration. I've put a link here to AICCM. This is the Australian Institute for Conservation of Cultural Material. They have a lot of information there on environmental parameters and that kind of thing. So if you want to open up that conversation with your institution, that's a very good place to start. So the first is temperature and relative humidity. So as with temperature, a high relative humidity increases the deterioration rates of most materials by providing more water to take part in chemical reactions. But the reverse is also true. If you have too high humidity, you can have mold. If your humidity is too low, your items can suffer desiccation and cracking. So it is important to get the range correct. Typically, the temperature range is advised to be 15 to 25 degrees Celsius and the relative humidity 45 to 55%, with a plus or minus 5 fluctuation range. And that is for a temperate climate, which Sydney is. And again, AICCM has more guidelines on other regions and different types of collections as well. The important thing to note here is, even if your levels are higher, it's much more important to avoid large and frequent fluctuations in temperature and humidity than it is to worry about getting within the range. So fluctuations are the danger. The next agent is light, and we're talking about visible light and UV content. Air pollution, this can be gases or particulates such as dust and soot. Pests, insects or rodents. And unsurprisingly, people. We're one of the biggest agents of deterioration and damage for collections. So very quickly, the mechanisms of deterioration, there's 3 main ones. Chemical damage, this is caused by chemical reactions between the materials the object is made from and those agents that we just spoke about: light, heat, moisture, pollution, pests, or people. All organic materials deteriorate, including us as humans. We can't stop this entirely, but we can intervene to slow it down by modifying the environmental factors. Chemical reactions are complex and they're often interconnected. For example, visible and UV light can cause fading to some materials, textiles, paper, pigments, etc. But they can also accelerate other chemical reactions that deteriorate these materials. Chemical damage is cumulative and it's irreversible, which is why, for example, institutions commonly limit the amount of time special collections material is held on exhibition to mitigate the damage caused by light exposure. You can't do away with it altogether, but you can control it. And it's always that balancing act. You know, the best thing for special collections and archives would be to pack them up in the dark, in a cool, dry environment and never use them. But that's not what cultural institutions are about. So we have to find an appropriate balance. So if we start from the building itself and work our way in, what are some things we can do for our collections? If we start with temperature and relative humidity, we can all ask for access to the building monitoring system for the heating, the ventilation, and the air conditioning system, commonly called HVAC systems. Have that conversation with the building operations staff and don't assume they know what your collections need. You are the ones with that crucial information and you may have to tell them. And there typically will be some ability to adjust the parameters within a building environment. And again, that's a trade-off between human comfort and the collections. And each building is going to have a different setup. If you don't have a conservation department, it's also a good idea not to rely on the building monitoring system. Do your own independent monitoring. You can purchase little devices called data loggers quite cheaply, and they can be placed around your collection storage areas and set to continuously monitor temperature and humidity. You can download that information onto a laptop and report. That can help you advocate for better systems And it will also help you build up a picture of your collection storage rooms, where the bad areas are, where the good areas are, so that you can adjust where things are kept. It's a good idea to avoid storing or housing collections up against external walls. The changes in temperature between inside and outside can cause condensation. So if possible, keep your walkways around the outside and the collection materials towards the inside. Onto lighting. If you store collections in a room with windows open to the external environment, you can use UV blocking films on the windows to prevent direct sunlight and UV from entering. You can also use blackout blinds. You have a choice of bulbs or tubes in the lighting to eliminate UV and control the visible light. And LED bulbs are, they're cool, they don't emit much heat, and they're very long lasting. So they're better from an environmental point of view, and for your budget as well. In storage and work areas, it's a great idea to consider motion sensor lights that automatically turn off when no one is in there. And that means you just don't have to think about it, that those areas are just dark all the time unless someone needs to be in there. Shelving for collection materials. Most cultural institutions use powder-coated steel shelving. This is an inert material in that it doesn't corrode or off-gas. It's raised up off the floor in case of flooding. It's very robust and strong. And I have heard it said that the smoothness of the powder coating can be a deterrent for pests, but I'm not quite sure about that. But all things considered, it's a great choice. Decorative or heritage wooden shelving can be lovely, but it can, the wood itself or varnishes or paints can off-gas and create microclimates inside the drawers, and possibly even staining. So they're not usually a good idea. Okay, so moving on to pest management. It's really important to quarantine and inspect any incoming collection material that you may have purchased or that might have been donated. You don't know where it's coming from. It could have come from someone's garage or shed. Even private houses can easily have cockroaches or silverfish or pests. Also, equipment, supplies, stationery, anything that might have been purchased and come from warehouses, those kind of boxes are prime suspects to bring insects into your institution. So really good idea to not bring them into areas where there are collections until you've unpacked them and inspected the contents. Don't leave stationery supplies and equipment in boxes. Unpack it and put it on your storage shelving and get rid of the boxes. If you do notice pest infestations, a typical treatment is freezing items. You can typically outsource this to conservation companies, or with a little bit of training, you could do that yourself. Purchase a chest freezer and learn. There are courses out there where you can learn what material is suitable, what isn't, and how to prepare materials and freeze them to eliminate pests. It's also a good idea to think about having an annual program of spraying. There are specialist pest management companies out there that deal with cultural institutions, and they will have a good idea of the types of pests that are typically attracted to the kinds of material that you have. and can treat accordingly. And they can also do inspections and reports for you to teach you about what other tasks you can do to integrate pest management within the care of your collections. So they're usually a good source of training and information as well as where to buy equipment, etc. You can do your own regular monitoring and reporting. Typically, sticky traps are used, and these are like little cardboard tunnels with a sticky bottom that you put around the floor in strategic places, and they're also called blunder traps, and insects walk in there and literally get stuck onto the sticky surface, and you can kind of regularly monitor them and see what pests you're getting and where they're coming from. It's usually a good idea to have them around doorways to see where, you know, how they're moving through the building. You can do staff training on pest identification, and there are various charts out there which you can laminate as wall posters and have in your storage areas. And it's also useful to take photos of what you're finding and keep a simple spreadsheet so that your knowledge builds up over time. And it's useful for staff turnover, you know, so it's not kept in someone's head and they leave and the next person doesn't know what you've been doing. And finally, it's a good practice not to leave items leaning up against walls. This can create a bridge for pests. Unpack things, materials, equipment, housing materials, and as far as possible, keep them separate to collection storage physically in a separate room. Housing and supports. So this is something that I feel quite passionate about, and it's a very cost-effective and easy program to initiate. Housing and boxing for your collections can help to protect collection items against environmental fluctuations, temperature and humidity, light and UV radiation, dust, dirt and pollution, pests, and handling damage and accidents. As a rule of thumb, anything touching your collection items should be archival quality material. And that means the materials are resistant to deterioration or loss of quality, and they have a long life expectancy when they're in controlled conditions. So think about the housing that you typically need. Boxes, folders, envelopes, plastic sleeves, paper clips, all of these things. Buy them from a reputable supplier of archival materials. I will be sharing some resources at the end. It's a good idea to, when material comes into your collection, to remove any non-archival items, sticky tape, staples, ties, metal paper clips, bulldog clips, etc. Plus the boxing itself, folders, and replace it out for good quality archival materials. If you have books and you find loose inserts inside, such as newspaper clippings or auction results or notes, it's a good idea to put them in mylar sleeves and keep that inside the book. Mylar is an archival plastic. It's inert and safe to touch collection items, and it has a certain rigidity to it. So it also makes fragile clippings and such easy for a client to handle. And it stops newspaper or other bad quality inserts from touching the book directly, because over time they can leave a stain or migrate unwanted chemicals into the item itself. So if you want to institute a boxing or housing program, there are many, many off-the-shelf options available for housing. I'll give you some websites at the end. You can buy them in bulk and they typically arrive flat pack, all ready to assemble, so they're very easy. You can also make arrangements with many of these archival suppliers to for them to create bespoke options if you don't have in-house conservation staff. For example, if you have a selection of objects or rare books, you can do a boxing program to get bespoke boxing that fits each item exactly. You would simply send them a list of measurements and the boxes arrive flat pack for you to assemble. Book and object supports such as cushions, foam wedges and weights. These are all useful to have a collection of so that they can be used by staff when they're working with the collection items, also for clients and researchers, and they can also be useful for display or exhibition. So they can be sort of, they can multitask if you like. Again, conservation suppliers have these, and you can also make simple ones yourself if you have access to the raw archival materials on the roll and you have any basic sewing or craft skills. We'll talk about that a bit later in the resources too. Exhibition and display can be tricky without a budget, a dedicated budget and a conservation department for each exhibition to create bespoke supports. There are some adjustable systems available out there, but they are quite expensive. So in terms of what you can do with your staff, it's good to establish a set of in-house rules. PPE is something to consider, particularly gloves. Each institution commonly has its own viewpoint on this. At Rare Books at Sydney Uni, we advocate for clean and dry hands as being best for library materials. They're often very brittle and fragile and need the sensitivity of your fingertips to turn the pages gently. But different institutions have their own rules, so just follow, whichever institution you're in, follow those guidelines. If gloves are advocated, disposable nitrile gloves are best. They're non-allergenic and they're a tighter fit than the white cotton gloves, so they allow for greater manual dexterity. It's important, some materials, it is important to wear gloves, so gloves should be worn for any metal objects as your fingerprints can tarnish the metal, and also unbound photographs, loose photographs. Your fingerprints can leave marks on the emulsion if touched, if the surface is touched directly. It's really important to have a no food and drink rule in the collection, storage, work and display areas. And for us, that includes everything across the board: mint, gum, bottles of water, etc. This just prevents accidents. No one, well, hopefully no one is going to intentionally harm the collections, but accidents can happen. So that cup of tea on your desk might be, you know, lovely, but if you can make a rule to step outside when you want to eat and drink, that it's best overall for your collections. And it's also good to be seen to be doing the right thing in front of your colleagues and patrons. It's a good idea also to avoid potted plants and flowers in areas where collection materials are stored or used, as they're a source of water and pests, and those things don't mix with collections. Handling training is important for your staff. You want anyone working with special collections material to be comfortable taking material on and off shelves, holding items in a supportive way, and getting used to doing a simple assessment to see if an item is damaged before launching into using it. a lot of times damage might not be immediately apparent, and you might have to examine an item for even just for a few seconds before you start using it. Staff training, handling training might involve how to use supports such as cushions, weights, pillows, mounts, etc. It might include the use of various housing types, different types of boxes, folders, fastening mechanisms. It's amazing how many people put things back incorrectly in boxes. They put them in upside down or try and put them in the lid and close the box onto the lid. And so a bit of training goes a long way there. Also, packing and transport. It's important that staff feel confident that they know the best way to package fragile or vulnerable collection items so that they're safe during transport. It's a great idea that staff working with special collection material have an idea how to do very basic condition assessment and reporting. This can be useful if you're sending material off-site to get digitised or conserved or loaning to another institution. You want to have an idea of its condition before it leaves, and you want to be able to check it against that when it arrives back in the building. This doesn't have to be in depth. It can be just taking a series of good quality photographs, noting any obvious damage and being able to check that again at a later stage. If you're actually doing an audit of a collection damage for a particular task, whether it's safe to send out for digitisation, for example, you might like to use a simple traffic light system. Green if the item's safe to undertake that activity, orange if it can be done with some precautions put in place, and red if doing that activity will further damage the material. A few extra things here I'll whiz through. Consider adding labelling on the box if you have particularly damaged items, explaining any special handling requirements. That can be very useful for staff and clients if they're not familiar with that item. It will be extra reassurance for them. The same goes for enclosure instructions. For example, boxes with different closing mechanisms or folders with flaps on, you can number them to tell people how to open and close it properly. Other physical cues you can use to indicate when an item is damaged. When we have books, for example, with the boards or covers detached or partially detached, we tie a bit of unbleached white cotton tape around the book. It does help to keep the board together with the book, but more than that, it just sends a signal that this item is damaged, so be careful when you're handling it. You might like to consider creating some how-to documents or videos for handling unusual formats. For example, palm leaf manuscripts or accordion or fold-out artist books or maps. It's a great idea to have a program of regular cleaning and dusting of your collection material and the shelving. Dust is a food source for insects and mold, so it's again an important step against mitigating against pests and mold, as well as improving the experience of working with the items for researchers, clients, staff. I've talked a little bit about creating support, so I'll skip over that. And if you really want to get into it, you can develop a matrix for decisions around activities such as conservation or digitisation. And this is usually a combination of an item or a collection's condition, its financial value, significance, rarity, and use. So you can take all of these things into consideration so that you can compare one item against each other and see how they rank, so that you can prioritize, especially good if you have a limited budget for things like that. Okay, on to some resources before we open up for chatting. The top two, Museums and Galleries of New South Wales and the Australian Museums and Galleries Association, they say galleries, but they are very relevant also for libraries and archives. They have a huge amount of information there on setting up policies and procedures, any grants and funding for programs of work, the more scientific information like environmental controls. Some larger institutions have posted their own policies there, so you can get a sense of what different templates look like if you are looking to implement any of that documentation yourself. The Australian Institute for Conservation of Cultural Material, AICCM, this is the professional umbrella body for conservators in Australia. It's useful to know about because not only do they have a lot of evidence-based knowledge and resources, but if clients or researchers ever ask you for recommendations for a conservator or things like that, you can direct them there. They have a search facility where you can put in the type of speciality or the location and search for accredited conservators across Australia. So that's quite useful. A couple of suppliers next. Archival Survival. They are great. We use them a lot to purchase archival quality boxes, folders, paper envelopes, archival photocopy paper that we use to create call number slips that we put in our rare books. Conservation Supplies Australia is another one. I think they're relatively new. I haven't used them, but they're good to know about. And Conservation by Design, Larsen Jewell. Larsen Jewell is typically a framing, a supplier of archival materials for picture framing, but Conservation by Design does have some relevant supplies as well. And all of these places have not just materials and housing, but equipment, tools, supplies, lots of things. So they're good to have a rummage. And a lot of common PPE and cleaning supplies can be sourced from Officeworks or wherever your institution buys their stationery. So you can get soft brushes and masks and gloves and all of those things. So that's it from me. I might stop screen sharing and I'd like to open it up to the group at this point to see if anyone has any questions or comments. One thing I forgot to reiterate is that we're all a fantastic resource for each other. And if in doubt, just reach out to another institution and ask what they do. People are really delighted to help. And I can't tell the number of visits that I've hosted from colleagues at other institutions, just kind of curious to see what we do, how we do it, why. And in turn, it's a really enriching and useful thing to do for me to visit other institutions and see how other people approach these issues. There's no right answer. Everyone does things slightly differently. So don't be shy to talk to each other.
That was so wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie. I have so many questions that popped into my head, but the one that I wanted to start with was in the beginning, you talked about how conservation activities can be used to help fundraise. So I was wondering if you could give us an example of that in your career, in your experience, like how that works.
Yeah. Let's see, at Sydney University Library, we've had some success in requesting funding for big programs of work, such as boxing a significant collection, or sometimes for interventive conservation treatments for really, for treasures or really particular items. And I think a lot of institutions overseas, I worked for some time in the UK, and a lot of the larger institutions, they used to do adopt a book programs where they would have a interventive conservation program running, and they would invite the general public to sponsor the conservation on a book. And you might think that it wouldn't get much traction, but people do have quite strong reactions to, or strong connections with special collections material, and it can make a nice way to commemorate a loved one who may not be with them anymore, or to celebrate a special occasion or a birthday. So we've had some of that as well. We've had people who wanted, their father's passed away and he had a particular interest in early medicine, and they've picked a book, and we have contributed towards its care or upkeep, or even acquiring a book in the first place. So there's lots of things you can do with that. And even if you pay for it yourself, you can get a lot of, there are promotional opportunities, which sounds, I don't know. We all have to do that. It's a reality of caring for our collections, that side of it, fundraising and promoting. But if you look at it as an opportunity to invite people to collaborate with you, people are looking for opportunities to do that. So a little promotion can go a long way. Let's have a look what else is in the chat.
Someone put, what is the best way to store old newspapers?
Oh, okay, that's a tricky one, because they're terrible quality paper, so they'll go brown and brittle and degrade almost while you're looking at them. Digitisation can be an effective preservation activity if you're worried that very vulnerable material is going to deteriorate to the point where you may not be able to read the contents anymore, or they might suffer losses, pieces fracturing away. Get them digitized so that you have a copy of them. Otherwise, one of the most important things is to keep them away from light. So you box them, keep them dark. Once the damage is done, there's not much you can do to improve them. So once they are brown and brittle, that's how they are. But yeah, boxing and digitisation. Night gloves. What does that mean? Oh, nitrile gloves, I see. Nitrile gloves are they're like rubber gloves, but they're non-allergenic. Some people have allergies to rubber. So nitrile, they're very commonly available. You can get powdered or unpowdered. We use unpowdered because if you're in them for any length of time, you'll sweat and the powder will create a lovely paste inside the gloves. So I prefer the non-powdered ones. And you can get them in a range of sizes, so it's good to have on hand.
Okay, we've got Philip. Go ahead, Philip.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were going to look at newspapers, but all right, I'll ask my question. We'll come back to newspapers, I guess. The library that I run at the moment is looking in a very concentrated way at the rare books collection, which goes back, we have books from the 16th century coming up to the 21st. And I've had no experience of boxing. I've seen it in other libraries, the black boxes and, all custom made for the big books, the Octava, the big one, small. But that part of the process seems pretty straightforward to me, being able to match the box with the book. It's the actual shelving, or in our library, the rare books are arranged in chronological order by folio plus and folio minus. Right? So when you suddenly have black boxes that you're moving around and you forget what was in them and stuff like that. So I suppose there are two questions. Do you shelve those box books in those places, or do you have to store them in another part of the library, or do they have a special room of their own? And I suppose the second question is, how do you identify them on the outside, like very simply?
I think every institution is going to have a different system. So my answer might not work for you, but with our rare books, they're on the shelf according to their call number, in call number order for whatever collection they belong to. And they're identified by a call number slip. And this is it's like a bookmark, really. It's a strip of archival paper that we insert loosely into the book so that it protrudes up above. And on that, we have the call number written and a barcode, usually a barcode sticker. And that barcode is the online record in our online catalogue. So there is some danger of that being disassociated or just simply falling out, but that's fine. We can just create another one. It's not a big deal. And we do it that way because we don't stick anything to rare books, so we wouldn't have a book plate or anything written on it physically. When we get around to boxing a collection, the first issue is that the space required increases because a book in a box takes up a little bit more room than a book by itself. So you need to have thought about that beforehand so that you have the room to expand that collection. And what we do then is simply label the box on the spine. So we duplicate the information on the call number slip and put that on the spine. We have the call number and a duplicate barcode so that it's easy to identify without having to take the book out.
So you would stand the box up?
For smaller size books, for folio or oversized books, we have them lying down, but still spine out. So we can still have the information on the spine. We just put it so that it can be read horizontally rather than vertically. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you, Julie.
You're welcome. And if anyone wants particular information about the type of boxes, there's so many types of boxes out there, but the ones we tend to use which are very cost effective, they're not fancy, they're archival corrugated cardboard. So they're grey cardboard, 2 layers with a corrugated layer in between. And they're quite robust. You can get different thicknesses for different strengths, and they're great. Sometimes if we have particular treasures and send individual items off for conservation, the conservator will make a handmade box for that item. But if you don't have the funds for that, these corrugated cardboard boxes are cheap and very effective at protecting the items.
We've got a few more coming in through the chat. So about newspapers again, do I need to put special protection between individual sheets of newspaper, or can I keep as entire newspaper and store in a box?
We don't actually have newspapers in our collection, so I would probably advise talking to someone like the State Library who do, and they would be able to give you their advice. I know, I don't think it's going to be practical to put lining in between newspaper because that would double its volume. So I think as long as you pay attention to the housing and the environment, making sure it's not too moist or warm, so that you're slowing down those chemical reactions.
Someone has a question about the book shoe. Could you please share more if you know about it and how useful it is in supporting the book?
Okay,
I haven't heard of this.
Okay, so a book shoe is a type of slipcase. So everyone I'm sure, would be familiar with the concept of a slipcase, which is a box that's open at the spine, so you can slide a book in and out of it. A book shoe is the same, with the addition of a little insert along the bottom edge. How can I describe this? So with many books, the covers extend beyond the pages. There's typically 5 mil or so around all directions. And when a book is stored upright, over time, particularly if it's a heavy book, gravity can cause the book itself, the pages, to drop down, because they're kind of, the pages are hanging there. There's that kind of 5 millimeters or so gap. So the book shoe just builds up that area so that when you slide the book into the slipcase, the pages have something to rest on, so that they're not hanging and the weight of gravity isn't pulling at the binding. Typically, you would need an in-house conservation department to make those. I don't think many smaller institutions without a dedicated team would have the staff capacity to do that, because although they're cheap and relatively quick to make, it's a whole other job, and that would be all you're doing if you're doing that. So that might be something you could talk to conservation suppliers to see if they can provide those. I don't know, we don't. I can't give you any more information about that, but I can say that the resources that I ran through, particularly the couple at the beginning, AICCM and the museums and galleries, there's a lot of information on there, a lot of resources about how to make simple enclosures, how to make simple supports. So there could well be instructions in there somewhere to make them if you fancy having a go. And maybe you could set up a volunteer program or connect with a conservation training course and get some conservation students in to create some for you. There's lots of options there.
We have some
free cataloging software.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, I might open that up to the whole group. I don't think I have an answer for that one. If no one has any comments, I would suggest talking to some larger institutions who have in-house digitisation and seeing what they use. Talk to a range of institutions and see what's out there. Aha, Maggie, Maggie's posted a link from the State Library on storing newspapers. So that's fantastic. And there are some other fact sheets as well. So another fab resource.
Great. Does anybody have any more questions for Julie?
If you think of anything afterwards, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to show you pictures of what we use. I can organise a visit if you want to come and have a look. I ran out of time to populate my slides with nice shiny pictures, but I'm very happy to go into more detail with anyone who wants to talk about a particular aspect.
That's so great. Thanks so much, Julie. Well, I think we'll end here. I just want to remind everybody, if you're not already a member of ALIA Rare, because we kind of promoted this on social media as well, so some of you may not, please sign up for the ALIA Rare mailing list and you'll get more reminders about other activities we have coming up. Okay, and thanks everybody. We'll end it here.
Thanks so much, Paige.